This is Matt from MGMT Boston. On this episode of The Lantern, we are in Cyvl in Somerville to talk about this hardware-enabled service company making roads better here in Boston and far beyond. I'm with Dan McCarthy, the head of product. Dan, thanks for being here.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for saying hardware-enabled software. We're trying to make that very standard, so I'm excited.
So first question, tell us what Cyvl is and what is your role here?
Yeah, for sure. Cyvl works with 300 municipalities across America to map their infrastructure into a digital world so that we can create better outcomes for them. More tangibly, we work with this sensor. This is designed and built in-house here, and we ship that off to the towns. They are able to drive their roads with it, and we're collecting data, both lidar and imagery with GPS to make a 3D map of the city. And then from that, what is really the key ingredient here is we're extracting key features of infrastructure. So our bread and butter is roads specifically. So we're able to identify different distresses in the road. And historically, that would be a manual process that would take months, if not a year. Whereas now it's taking 6 weeks for Atlanta and really changing the way you focus on the outcomes you get from this data-driven process.
Awesome. And as the head of product, what are some of the main things you're tackling?
Yeah, I'm always working with our towns to figure out what is next and what to build to continuously make their jobs easier and the citizens happier. I would say something I always push on is public works is a really difficult job. They're almost always understaffed, under budget, and they typically don't have a ton of data at their fingertips, and we're trying to change that. And I also always highlight that, if something happens with a road where it's incorrectly built, they have to rip it all up and do it again. It's a lot different than making a software and bug error where you go in and change it really quickly.
Yeah. Now, you guys are growing super fast, hiring for a bunch of roles, which I know you're going to touch on. What are some of the big things happening this summer, heading into the fall, that you and your team are excited about?
Yeah, for sure. So we're really excited to be launching our new infrastructure intelligence platform that's really based around being able to interact with our data in a more effective way. And I'll give some backstory for that. But the two use cases are really about, the one that's more standard is how do we allow our towns to identify infrastructure that they want to key in on? A really good example would be give me all the signs in poor condition in Jamaica Plain. And then being able to, as a town foreman, identifying that and making a plan to go action off it quickly versus manually driving around and saying, okay, these are all the poor stop signs. And then the one that's more complex and what's going to be really exciting, and I'm stealing this from one of our clients that I kind of phrased this, but giving them the building blocks for the full life cycle of infrastructure. Right now, we are telling them the conditions out there, which is more than they've had in the past. But what do they do with those conditions to then make that infrastructure better? And we're able to help them build plans quicker. And they are the experts, and we're giving them the building blocks to make those decisions.
That's awesome. Much better than running around with a clipboard, for sure. And what are some of the things you've learned from building this startup, Dan, that you would pass back to other builders in the community?
Yeah, two things that I've been thinking a lot about, but the first one is something that's been shifting over the last year for me is, as a product person, you're always trying to get all the data and information at your fingertips, but there can be an overload of that information. And so it's really about figuring out what are the key pieces of data you really need, the key metrics, but then also moving fast, shipping fast, and then reacting to that and making informed decisions. I think in the past, I would do a ton of product discovery, and then we would never actually ship to anything, even if the client said it would be interesting, because they're never going to react until they actually have a product at their hands. So it's really about simplifying that process, especially as a startup. You don't have thousands of customers to do all this analytics on. And then the second one is kind of related, but especially earlier in my career, when there was somebody higher level, like a high level person at a client or a board member, you always thought they wanted to be dazzled with the vision of the product, but it's hard to just dazzle with this vision of 5 years. It's very abstract. And so being able to show a specific example that's really interesting and a cool new piece of product, and then tying that to the broader vision and not talking about everything within the vision has been really huge for me and how we're communicating.
That makes a ton of sense. And last but not least, how can we help Cyvl grow here in Boston and beyond? What does your team need help with?
Yeah, for sure. So the first thing is, if you work in public works or the town, if you know an elected official, or you just are living in a town with roads that could use some work, once again, it's a really hard job, and we're trying to make everyone aware that there's technology out there that can really help with their day-to-day, make their lives easier, and also make their citizen lives happier. And then the other one I'd say is we are definitely hiring. especially in the engineering department, we're building a lot of cool products, and we're looking for software developers to come on board.
This is Dan, the head of product at Cyvl, Matt from MGMT Boston on this episode of The Lantern. Thanks so much for having me to your office.
Appreciate it.